All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Sparked HL7 AU eRequesting Technical Design Group meeting for Thursday, the 20th of November, 2025, the second last meeting before we wrap up these ballot for comment issues. So we've got a few things to get through today. Michael's going to be driving most of the time, but I'll do the usual business. So first of all, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting today, wherever you may be, whether that be in a Westfield or somewhere else. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators and healers. All right, so here's our agenda. Usual business at the beginning, update on actions from previous meetings, not sure we have any of those. Michael will give us the ballot for working standard update, and then we will get into the reconciliation issues for today. And then we'll give you a quick look at the next three dates that we have coming up. All right, so first of all, we're going to deal with the meeting minutes. Thanks, Michael, that's helpful. For the previous meeting chaired by Stuart. Would anyone like to motion to accept these minutes?
I'm happy to motion the minutes. Michael Osborne.
Thank you, Michael Osborne. And do we have a second?
David McKillop.
Thank you, David. All right, we will launch a poll. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. I'm pretty sure you all know the drill by now.
I'm +1 in the chat.
Thank you. We'll wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. Perhaps uncontroversially, that one has passed 8 votes affirmative, 7 + 1, and 9 abstained. All right. Brief note on the upcoming HL7 Australia Melbourne Fire Connect-a-thon, 2-day events in Melbourne, coming up on the Tuesday and Wednesday, the 9th and 10th of December. This Connect-a-thon is currently sold out. So if you do want to attend, you need to get yourself on the wait list. Events at hl7.com.au. And if you can't attend, please let HL7 Australia know so that somebody who wants to come can. That's very simple. Just email events@hl7.com.au and let them know, and that will be given to someone else. So that's coming up soon. All right, might pass over to you, Michael.
Yep, I'll share my. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. Okay, ballot for working standard update. So through that. So this is where we're at. We're actually making really good progress here. So all of our ballot issues have been triaged by the co-chairs. Actually done some extra ones. Reconciliation, which is everything we're bringing through the TDG, we're at 82%. So we've got about 20 issues left. The idea is to get through a lot of those today. And then we have a electronic block vote that's out at the moment as well, and then finish up at our next meeting on the 4th of December with a ballot reconciliation. And you can see there on the applied, so we've had 41 of the 62 issues that we've identified so far that actually need changes to the IG. So 66% of those have been applied. So if you go to the current IG, you'll actually see those changes coming through. If you have a look at changelog, you'll see once decisions have been made that they're coming through. So we're getting there. Hopefully another 2 meetings and electronic vote, and we'll be there. Cross fingers. So we'll get through more today. So this sort of ties in with our timeline here. So we're in ballot reconciliation now. We had flagged that to be complete by the end of November. Hopefully we won't be far past that. I think our next meeting's on the 4th of December, and that's one where we plan to wrap up the rest of them. So we'll be pretty close to that. Then what HL7 will do is go out to all voters and ask them if they'd like to withdraw their votes. So hopefully then we can get our negative votes up or down. So we can get from our 20% affirmative up to 60% affirmative that we need for publication. So hopefully we can get to that. I just saw in the chat, Jai, yep, I'm about to get to the block votes and I'll drop it in the chat shortly. So a bit of summary of the last 2 block votes. We've had 2 block votes that were out. We had block vote 5, which was clarifications and presentation improvements. So that was open from the 30th of October to the 13th of November. And the results from that was we had 10 affirmative, no negative, no abstain, and there was no refer to telecon in that one either. So that block vote has completed. And we had another one, which was block vote 6. And that was issues that were being deferred as considered future use. It was open during the same period, had the same vote count there as well. And that has passed. No refer to telecon from that one either. So now getting into the reconciliation. So this is now block vote 7. I think Andy has dropped 7 in the chat. So this one is currently open. So this is our last electronic vote. All the other issues will be resolved in either today or the next meeting, other than these ones in this block vote. I will show you what's in this one. We do need as many people as possible voting in these electronic block votes. So please have a look. Links in the chat, have a vote even while you're in this meeting. It will certainly help. So these are the issues. You can click on each of the issues to have a look at them. In the issue, it's got the resolution that's proposed here. They're all not persuasive issues. So then you can just place your vote here. You have to be logged in, but then you can place your vote. If there's any you think need to be discussed at the next meeting, you refer to telecom, but you do have to add a comment. The same if you vote negative, you need to provide a comment as to why you're voting negative. And that will close on the 26th of November. So next Wednesday, close of business next Wednesday. So please get your votes in for that one. So these are the ballot issues we've got on the agenda for today. So we've got a reasonable number here. Hopefully we can get through them all so we stay on track for getting the final ones resolved in the next meeting, but we'll see how we go. And we might jump straight in. We're probably going to work from these from top to bottom. I know I've got a number of people from the clinical design group here keen to talk about sex parameter clinical use. So we'll jump into those 2 first, and then we'll get into the other ones as we go through the day. Okay, 552.4.10. I will put this one in the chat. Have a look. Back. So this is around adding a note regarding the positioning of the CDG on the sex parameter for clinical use. So I don't know, Kylin, are you on the call? Did you want to have a quick talk through this one?
Yeah, I think all we were asking is that we wanted a note to say that the CDG hasn't endorsed the sex parameter for clinical use. So, there's a various number of reasons why we did have a meeting to kind of think about what those things are, and it really did boil down to it's not in active use. It doesn't have endorsement from peak clinical bodies. There was no established clinical framework around it, and it did. And I think one of the conclusions really came down to is that we needed like a national change management around this. So from our point of view, from the CDG point of view, we weren't including it in AUCDI. So we were just asking to put in a note to kind of note that within the eRequest IG.
Yep. So I can show if we jump to here on our IG. Just the structure of where this is shown at the moment. So under our guidance in the IG, we have sex and gender page, which is taken from AU base and the like, but it describes all the sex and gender concepts in here. You'll note here that we've got sex parameter clinical use, and we've made it must support. So the green means it's a must support. We've put it on diagnostic request, imaging request, and pathology request. It is also actually on AU Core patient, which we've inherited through our new eRequesting patient profile. That's not a must support. So it's just localized. There's this reference there. It's not must support. And it's not on any of the other profiles. And this covers the others. And we've got a description down the bottom here about the sex parameter clinical use and our usage here. So I think jumping back to the resolution for this, it's persuasive modification just because the text is slightly different from what, oh, sorry, Chris, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, just to follow on, I mean, I think it's been quite an interesting thing, both from a process and a sort of an overall point of view. I mean, I think there's actually quite a lot of sympathy and support for the concept, because I think it's something to develop, but essentially there are two things. It's not in general use, generally not approved by the clinical bodies, but I think the other thing is it's just something that's a bit too new for the average punter. Anybody else, most of the people that practice probably wouldn't understand this at this stage, although I get it, just see it for a few of my patients. So I think it's something that's really good, but doesn't really fit with wasn't approved by the clinical group, but arose through the TDG and was approved there. So I think that's why we're looking at this. I think the other thing is that I think it was interesting in terms of it's actually about just review of the sort of process issues with interaction between TDG and TDG being very positive. So I think overall this is good, but I think definitely support of the note there.
Yeah. So this is what coaches have discussed this. We think it's persuasive with modification. So it's just a slight change of the text that I think Kylie had proposed. But we're looking to add the following text to the SPCU section of that sex and gender page I just showed you as an STU note. So standard for trial use note, and basically saying that when implementing sex parameter clinical use, implementers should be aware that there is no national clinical framework supporting its use, and that does not yet have endorsement from peak clinical bodies in the broader community, has not yet been endorsed by the SPARC TDG, and has not been included in AU-CDI and AU-PI as clinical concept for national use. So that's kind of the disclaimer we're looking at putting on there. That would stay there on this sex and gender page as an SGU note, similar to this, noting. And what we do is from our other profiles, for example, where it's in use, we'll have a look at say, service request, imaging request. You'll note here that there is in the profile specific guidance. I've just lost my reference to it now. It's actually on the general guidance for the profiles. It talks here about. I've lost the link now. Here we go. This profile supports sex and gender related concepts, sex parameter clinical use. When exchanging concepts, refer to the guidance in sex and gender. So it links you back to this page, which gives you the guidance here, which would have that STU note on it. So this would be centralized with the sex parameter of clinical use. No. Any questions on that? Are there any concerns about the wording of that? No, Ruben?
Yeah, I was just wanting to know if this had actually been fully discussed in the harmonization group, which is where I understood it was going to go.
It hasn't. That's still an in progress action. So I think this note still supports that, as in when we have a national framework or have gone through a process in that harmonization group to review the guidance, we may update this, but at this point we haven't completed that. It hasn't gone back through the harmonization group yet. I think we are looking to have a harmonization group meeting later this year. So it'll probably come back up there, but yeah.
So yeah, I'm kind of wondering if this isn't a bit cart before the horse. Shouldn't we have had the harmonization discussion and reached an outcome before putting something like this into the spec?
Probably should have, but it hasn't. So this is the current resolution as of
So,
now.
so the concern I have here is that a statement like this is effectively saying it's unsafe to do this. So then it kind of calls into question why it's even there. That's my read of it, really.
I think, Ruben, we're just saying literally what it says, that there is no national clinical framework. It's not endorsed by peak bodies, and we haven't endorsed it by the CDG at this point. That's all we're saying, Ruben.
And and understand that, but at the same time, that then has a very strong implication that everything else that doesn't carry a warning like this as a national framework and has been endorsed by the CDG. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I don't know that I would assume everything was the opposite if it didn't state that.
Yeah, I said it implies it.
I think the nature of this too, though, is it's an STU note. Like it's a standard for trial use, and which is where we are with this. It's for trial use, and we saw in the TDG that the sex parameter clinical use was useful for inclusion, and we're noting here that it hasn't been endorsed by the CDG and the like. So in the next version, we may change our use of SPCU. So this is just where we are at the moment.
So thanks for making that point. There are a number of things in AU core, and I'm not sure maybe eRequesting as well, which are not in AU CDI or eRequesting CDI that don't have this note either. So I guess I'm looking for a consistent approach, because this seems, I don't know, sort of singling out in a way. And Chris has had his hand up for a minute, so we might want to go there.
We do have the mappings. So this is the eRequesting, I'll put it in the chat as well, data for interoperability mappings. So we've noted here the mappings from the AU eRecDI data groups to eRequesting. Like not all of these. Like here's the other one we've got around pregnancy summary, which is in an AU CDI backlog. And we have gone through CDG to get some advice on this, which we've provided here inside of that as a note. Others are...
So if we look at that one as an example, Michael, we're not stating for pregnancy status that it's not been endorsed by the Spark CDG, right? So I'm saying it would be good if we had a consistent approach for everything that wasn't endorsed be treated the same way, rather than only having that specific note added for one element.
Chris, see your hands up.
Yeah, I mean, look, my view about this is just to look at it from a broad. I have a half full rather than half empty attitude about this, because I think conceptually this is probably more at the cutting edge of things, and I think I do see what you're saying, Ruben, but I think this is more at the cutting edge of things in terms of concept, and I think it's ahead of where most people are. But I think the flip side is I think we're going through it. I think it's good, and I think, from the point of view of the wider thing, it wasn't approved and it doesn't fit with the wider sort of clinical group. So I think having it there actually just puts that little thing there that it's coming, I think, almost. And I think you can look at it that way. I think it's a positive way to go very forward at this moment, frankly. And I think looking at the broader, the whole lot of everything else, I think this is potentially a way to move forward. And with the harmonisation, we could actually be reviewing that whole disclaimer at a later date. But I kind of look at it from a more positive view, but I think we're actually moving forward with it.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, the fact that that note is only applied to this element, it reads as if there is little or no support for it clinically. And so I'd say most implementers that read a note like that will steer clear of adopting it. Almost certainly. And then, it kind of calls into question why we've actually even put it there. So this is why I think doing the harmonization first is is probably going to come up with a better approach to this.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here because we do need to move through this, and while I don't disagree with any of these points, the committee has decided to put it forward in the current form. Would anyone like to propose a vote on the current wording?
I think I'm just noting that Ruben's comment about the harmonisation group. I think that we don't know how long that's going to take to resolve the issue. And if we don't resolve this now, we will hold up publication of eRequesting, given that it is unlikely this would be resolved this year, and that we would have to delay publication until we do have a resolution. I feel that this is a good interim step to state a position of where we are now. That doesn't mean that's where we're going to stay. And if we do happen, as soon as we get a resolution through the harmonisation group, we would look to change this to whatever that resolution is. But the alternative is we hold off on this and we don't do anything and don't necessarily resolve this issue. Ruben?
Yeah, I'm glad Andy put his hand up because I was actually going to invite some of the actual implementers of eRequesting to comment on how they would look upon as STU note like this. So I'll hand to Andy.
To be honest, I'm not too concerned because I think in terms of implementation, we need a way of consistently carrying within the technical framework of the transaction an intention of sex to use to associate with this patient only for the context of this clinical request transaction. So my and I guess immediate thing is that I don't think we would never present this to the clinicians. So it would be it would then be simply a alternative way of representing what we're currently doing, which is an administrative sex, which has more, well, should I say, less certainty about its intent. This makes the intent more explicit, but I don't think that from a clinical side of the clinical relationship, the UI is not going to see, for instance, 3 values for sex, and they've got to kind of choose a sex parameter for clinical use and a sex for the patient and another one. It will be simply a structuring mechanism for us. So not too worried about that. My main thing here is, I guess, just reading through those words. For most of it, I'm pretty happy. Doesn't make much. I think calling out this hasn't gone and been endorsed by the CDG. It's all good. The bit that I was kind of, I guess, questioning is the endorsement by peak clinical bodies. Have we got explicit endorsements from peak clinical bodies of other things? I guess I raise that because obviously there are CDG things that we have interpreted and then kind of purposed for our use in here. There are things in here which do not have a peak or a CDG equivalent because they're more potentially administrative in nature or have slightly different means of use. So I just wonder, though, introducing endorsed by peak clinical bodies would then, I guess, flag something to say, I would kind of be thinking that everything else is endorsed by peak clinical bodies and this one isn't. But I don't think we can, I've never thought of everything else in the eRequesting spec is endorsed by peak clinical body. Does that make sense?
It does. That's just kind of the point I was making earlier on. While it doesn't say everything else is, it certainly implies that.
I'm all happy with the CDG referencing, like this is not endorsed by the CDG. CDG have not had thought that this isn't time to do this yet, and blah, blah, blah. That's all great. I don't have any issue with that. It's really just that, yeah, peak clinical body bit, which I think might create some confusion.
Go ahead.
I'm happy with that. Like, I understand where you're coming from, Andy, and I'm happy to drop that sentence around, and that it is not yet it does not yet have endorsement from peak clinical bodies and the broader community, and just leave it as what is the rest of it. So essentially saying when implementing sex parameter for clinical use, implementers should be aware that there is currently no national clinical framework supporting its use, full stop. It has not yet been endorsed by the SPCU, blah, 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 blah. I'd be happy to drop that part in the middle.
What about you, Chris?
I'm fine with that. That's I think Andy's point about I've heard a few lawyers speak like that. That you got to look at the opposite sometimes. So I get where you're coming from. So I'm happy with that. I think overall though, I think we do need to put something like this while making it forward, because it does. It's sort of like my words are like, it's like cutting it, treading a line moving forward, but in a common sense way, and it keeps that credibility in terms of those who may have one view, but also kind of sees that we're progressive as well. So it's actually quite good. So yeah, I think I'm happy with the move on that line and let's just move forward.
Excellent. So Michael, with that Kylan's suggested amendment, I'd be happy to propose that be put to vote.
Okay. So we have a motion from Andy. Would anyone like to second that motion?
Am I allowed to? Can I?
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to second that, please.
Okay.
Chris put his hand up first.
Oh, sorry, Chris, you beat me.
Sorry.
So just confirming Andy's motioning and Chris's seconding, correct?
Yes.
Record? Very good. Okay, Michael, are you able to just adapt the text quickly on the screen?
Maybe I can get rid of it. Let me 2 seconds. What do
I'm just thinking, let's give people exactly what they're voting on before I launch it. So they
Yeah,
can,
I think I got it.
yeah,
Let's just relaunch that. Let's check that was it. When implementing sex parameter clinical use, implementers should be aware that there is currently no national clinical framework supporting its use. It has not been endorsed by Spark CDG. It has not been including AU CDI and AU eRequesting, the clinical concept for national use.
yes. Yep. Okay. All right. We shall launch a vote.
And +1 in the chat.
Thank you. All right, and we shall wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. And that one is passed. 24 affirmative, 23 + 1 in the chat, 1 negative, 3 abstained. Thank you all. Moving on.
Okay. Well, we're going to stay on this theme. We have another SPCU one. Sorry, jumped way too many slides ahead. Just want to paste this one in the chat. Okay, jump back to the slide. So this was raised by Ilya, and this is about possible discrepancies between SPCU at patient and service request resources. So it's possible to define SPCU on both resources, service request and patient. Service request has a subject field that refers to a patient with a one-to-one cardinality. As a result, it's possible to create a discrepancy for SPCU parameter against service request and patient. Since SPCU is always context specific, I propose to keep it only for service request, AU diagnostic request. So this is from our sex and gender page that we have in the IG. This is what I kind of discussed before, where we have SPCU as a must support on our diagnostic request, which is then inherited by imaging request and pathology request. It is also on the AU core or AU base, which goes to AU core, which then goes to AU eRequesting, is also on the patient profile, but has not been flagged as must support in either AU core or eRequesting. So I can just show you that. Let me get to the right page. This one here. So we actually have our new eRequesting profile now for patient. eRequesting patient. If you look at the snapshot, you'll see that there is a sex parameter clinical use, but there is no must support and there is no obligations on that there, versus when it's on our, say, diagnostic request, where we have sex parameter clinical use, we have a must support, and we've got our obligations here defined. So the one on patient is inherited from AU core patient. So it's in AU core patient. Here somewhere, sex parameter, again, no obligations, no must support in AU core. And that's inherited from AU base, where AU base doesn't have any obligations. It just defines the localization. So that's there. So noting all of that, we're looking at the resolution for this as being not persuasive. So the sex parameter clinical use element on AU core patient and the new AU eRequesting patient profile is not must support and not expected to be used in AU eRequesting. The sex parameter clinical use guidance in the AU requesting IG also states that SPCU should be used on the eRequesting imaging and pathology request. And this is the text we've got. The inclusion of SPCU value indicates the request is explicit, providing sex parameter intended for use in fulfillment of the requested diagnostic service. I won't read the rest of that. So we're proposing here that this is not persuasive with modifications. So we don't think we actually need to make any change to address this particular issue, but it probably would help to add some clarification. So this last note down the bottom here, which is the modification, that we should add to the SPCU guidance clarification that in AU requesting patient, SPCU is not must support. So we're not expecting it to be used. Does that make enough sense? Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay. Well, I'd like to motion that we accept this disposition of not persuasive modification on 52195.
Thank you, Michael. Would anyone like to second that?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, so Michael is motioning that we accept this as not persuasive modification, and Andy is seconding. I shall relaunch the poll.
+1 in the chat.
And we're going to wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. That one is passed. 24, 19 plus 1, 1 negative, and 3 abstained. Thank you.
Next one. I was wondering, I don't think Heath could join us today. I'll just check the list of people. Heath, are you there? Nope. So this next one was a carryover from the last meeting. I did discuss it with Heath. Heath is happy with the resolution to this because he raised the issue. We'll still go through it in the TDG and hold a vote. But yeah, we did have a verbal from him that he was okay with the resolution to this. We just didn't have time to vote on it in the last meeting. So I'll put this one in the chat. I'll get to it. Okay. So this is about shall populate also inherit shall populate if known. So this is about our obligations in eRequesting. So I might provide some context first. This is a pretty deep one. I know Heath normally loves talking about obligations. Right. Let's jump to requesting. I think it's under conformance. We have must support and obligations. And here we have descriptions of our actors and the sort of standard obligations that we have implemented in the IG. So we have here for the placer that we have a shall populate if known or shall populate. And we have descriptions here. And these are taken from, if you actually follow these links, this will actually take you to the FHIR definition of the obligation. And there's a whole heap here. So we've chosen the ones that we think were appropriate for the eRequesting IG. And so this is really just providing a summary of them in the context of our actors and how they're used. So we've got the shall populate, which I think this one is here. And in our description here in the notes, this implementation obligation means that whenever the producer knows the correct value for the element and populates it, this is not the same as cardinality, as populate can be admitted if no data exists or the data exists is prohibited from being shared. This obligation inherits the obligation of shall able to populate. So if you look at the definition of these obligations, they're really quite complex. So you've got here shall populate. On the right here is the right column here is the parent. So there's a hierarchy of obligations here. So from shall populate, it has parents, has two parents of shall able to populate, and shall able to populate has a parent of able to populate, and so it goes on. So there's a whole hierarchy of complex dependencies here, and we happen to have restated one of those, not all of them. We've just said inherits from shall able to populate. So we're proposing here about fixing that up. Here's the definition that we've got here, we've screenshot in. So we think it's persuasive that we actually update the definition here to remove the sentence, this obligation inherits the obligations of shall able to populate. The reason for that is there's multiple layers of inheritance in shall populate obligation, the FHIR specification. It doesn't need to be replicated here. So we don't need to provide all those levels of inheritance. We can just refer to it. And we also want to add, which is, I think, another part of this issue. The second half of this is that the current definition notes that an element can be omitted if no data exists or the data exists and is prohibited from being shared. If the previous section on mandatory element is interpreted correctly, missing data is not allowed for mandatory elements, then it should note, should be augmented further to indicate when this obligation is used. So this is different to AU Core. I don't know if anyone's been through the obligation discussions in AU Core. Given AU Core is more of a generic use case, even when it's mandated as shall populate, you can use missing data to populate that, but that's not the case that we want in eRequesting. And we have actually, I think it may have already made, yeah, we do have another ticket though that has actually firmed up the obligation to say if it is mandatory that you must provide data. So we're going to add this to the definition here to say, add the wording, when shall populate is applied to an element with minimum cardinality greater than 0, the element cannot be omitted and missing data shall not be represented using data absent reasoning conventions. So given we're exchanging data for requests, if we make an element mandatory, so the cardinality is 1 or more, we're stating here that we expect it to be populated. You can't say data absent because what is the filler supposed to do with that? If they were expecting the data and you said it's absent, then that creates a lot of complexity for the filler to deal with. So this is just firming up this definition, clarifying by removing the inheritance and text, and also adding a distinct statement to say where we stand on missing data. So it's like their obligations are complex. Are there questions on that one? Do we want to go into the obligations in any more detail or clarify it for anyone on the call? Okay. Well, I'd like to motion that we accept this disposition of persuasive and make those changes to the obligation section in the IG.
Thanks, Michael. Would anyone like to second?
I'll second it.
Sorry, who was that? Who seconded?
It was dry.
That was Jai. Very good. Okay, so we are voting for the persuasive disposition on the screen. Here comes a poll.
Plus one in the chat again.
Very good. We're going to wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. And that one is approved. 16 affirmative, 15 plus 1 in the chat, no negative, 8 abstained.
Okay. Next one. Use of tags. Check. Tags has definitely been a subject of conversation for quite a while. This was brought up by Epic in the ballot. So we had a kind of a bulk issue raised by Epic, which had a spreadsheet, a number of issues addressed in it. So this one was just pulled off from that. We had ended up having individual issues for each of the ones they'd raised in their parent one. This has been created from that. And the description of the issue was that it's not clear what necessitates the use of tags to classify tasks instead of using the combination of already available and mandated elements. So I've just got a little screenshot there at the bottom on our eRequesting task profile. We've put a slice on the meta.tag element, and we've bound that to our fulfillment task tags, which are required there. And our two values are a fulfillment task and a fulfillment task group. So that's used so that we can actually filter the tasks. And I might jump into the IG, have a look. One. Extension. So here, under task, we have an abstract profile, which is our eRequesting task. And then we have a communication request task, a diagnostic request task, and a task group. And so we have the diagnostic request task for tracking the fulfillment of diagnostic requests, and communication request task for tracking the fulfillment of communication requests associated with this. And then we have the group, which is the grouping element. And in our guidance under groups, this diagram is being updated as part of another ticket. But this is where we have the group task, which provides a link to all of the tasks that are created as part of the same ordering event, which then have the focus of the diagnostic request or the communication request. So this could be a group of one. There might be one diagnostic request, which has its associated task for fulfillment, and then the task group, or there may be multiple tests or exams requested as part of the same group. So then we have multiple tasks, multiple requests. We may have communication requests, requesting communication with the patient or not to communicate with the patient, or a copy to, all those types of things. And they all sort of form part of the same ordering event. They all have the same place of group number, this PGN, but the task group provides a way for a filler to find the group so that they can fulfill them. So they can perform queries on the task group. They go, give me the task, find me all the task groups that I need to fulfill. And then from there, it can go and get the individual tasks for each of the tests or exams that have been requested. So the problem with this, though, is that it wasn't possible to distinguish between a task group or a diagnostic request task or a communication request task, as the elements on them don't sufficiently distinguish them. So if we have a look at task, we have nothing in this that can identify it as being different. So the solution we came up with was on the meta.tag, adding a slice for this fulfillment task, and then on each of our profiles, if we have a look at the task group, we are saying for that tag, it has a fixed value of fulfillment task group. And on the diagnostic request, on that tag, we have a fixed value of fulfillment task. And we have the same on the communication request. And we have it as a fixed value as a fulfillment task as well. So that was the approach we came up with. We have a proposed disposition here saying that it's not persuasive, but may make a modification as well. And so this provides a justification for why we did it. So there's no easy way for workflow systems to distinguish between a fulfillment task for a service request and a fulfillment task group that represents and coordinates the overall group of requests created for a single ordering event. Task.meta.tag is being used so that different types of tasks can be identified for workflow processing by systems. For completeness, task code should also be made must support with a cardinality of 1-to-1 and a fixed value for fill from the task code's value set on the eRequesting task. Communication request. I think that's doubled up there. One of those should say diagnostic request. I'll fix that in a second. And eRequesting task group profile. So what we did when we originally went through this in the TDG, we were trying to work out whether we should use task code instead. And I think we got some feedback from the community on Zulp and the like that it probably wasn't appropriate. And so we went with the task tag solution. One of the things with that, though, is we never came back and actually assigned a code. And looking at task code, jump back here. If we look on the task profile, find code. We have code. So code is bound to a task code's value set. In this, there are values for approve, fulfill, abort, replace, change, suspend, resume. In our case, we think these are all fulfillment tasks. These are all for the fulfillment, even communication requests, fulfillment of the communication request. So it would make sense just to have them all coded. So then we can distinguish in the future if we were doing a abort or some other action on tasks, some sort of suspending resume, that we can distinguish these as these are all fulfillment tasks. If there are other types of tasks in the future, we'll be able to distinguish them on their code as well. I'll note that on this ticket, Heath did raise a comment. He's not here in this meeting, so we'll just talk to the comment that he's written. He had some concerns about the use of meta.tag for this purpose. He's saying that the file specification says that there are 3 meta attributes as part of the resource, but are never used to keep information that needs to be understood when interpreting the content of a resource. More specifically, it says tags are used to associate additional operational information with the resource, such as workflow management. Typical use of tagging would be to maintain an informal list of resources. It provides a link. I don't think the use of tags in this context of task group is related to operational information, although the task itself is related to workflow. understand the history and the requirement to distinguish between the individual task and the group, but perhaps a more specific task code can be used for this purpose instead. Perhaps something as generic as group, so it can be used in various scenarios, not just fulfillment. I had a go responding to that, saying that we did actually consider at a time a new task code such as fulfill group, but is not scaled to other actions in the task code value set, such as approve, abort, or replace. We'd have to have separate group concepts for them if we ever happen to use other types of tasks. A standalone group code also fails to indicate the required action for filtering in the way fulfill does. Also noted that the use of task meta.tag aligns with the work queues approach in the DaVinci Clinical Data Exchange IG, where request tags are used to indicate the general type of request so that systems can filter and sort tasks. eRequesting applies the same pattern, so Filler can identify the task group and searching for orders from a single ordering event. I'll put the link in here to the DaVinci one, just if anyone's interested. But this talks about using task tags, request tags. And the key thing here is that that the data source can use these data consumer supplied tags to aid in filtering and sorting of tasks. And they've done a similar pattern with us where there is a, find it now, fire artifacts. They have a, I think it's a task-based profile. Oh, that's value sets. All right. They've got slice for tag and they've called it work queue. And then they have a binding to a work queue value set. And then they have a number of different types of queues. So you're using tags in the same way, but to create queues. So this is potentially the same way we're doing it, where the filler can go, hey, go get me the groups. That's my queue of work to do. Go get me the group tasks. They can find them by task or by tag, and then continue. So I went through a huge amount of stuff there. Are there questions? Are we happy with? We're happy with tags. Continue to use the tags as we are, and also add that fulfill code for the bottom there that we just assign task code, because we didn't come back around and do that in the end, but for completeness, I think it makes sense to do that. Any questions? Everyone's happy? Andy, you happy? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to motion that we accept this proposal as not persuasive with modification. So the modification we'll make is add the fulfill code. I'll state it here. I won't fix it because I can't fix it easily. But fixed value of fulfill from the task codes value set on the eRequesting task communication request. The second one should be diagnostic request. And the last one is task group. So the three task profiles that we have.
Thanks, Michael. Do we have a second?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Andy. All right, poll in.
What's in the chat?
All right, so we're going to wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. And that one is passed. 16 affirmative, 15 plus 1 in chat, 6 abstained. Thank you.
We jinx us now, but I'm going to say we're making great progress.
Why did you do that?
Yeah, I know. I couldn't help us. Andy, this one was your one. So I'll put in the chat. Insurance data numbers. Chat along. So this is for our coverage profile and eRequesting. Can we add constraints such that if it's vet, is specified that a DVA number is provided as coverage identifier or from patient. But anyway, this we're using the coverage profile we have an eRequesting coverage profile. At the moment in here, we have this is for our insurance coverage. We have the type in here, which we have a minimum binding on eRequesting coverage and self-pay codes. And in here we have pay concession, public poll, and vet. And Andy's asking for that we should have an identifier associated with those when they're used. I'll actually jump to the next page because it probably explains it a bit better. I'll look at the resolution here. So the resolution we're looking at here is to make it clearer for our coverage profile on what coverage type is to be used for each scenario, as well as adding also the use of identifier, which previously wasn't in our profile. We didn't have any must supports or anything on coverage identifier. So what we're proposing here is we update the eRequesting coverage profile to add guidance on the representation of coverage identifiers for specific coverage types. So we would add a must support with default obligations to coverage.identifier. We'll keep it as optional though, okay, so it can be 0 to many. Add profile-specific implementation guidance to clarify the expected representation of coverage type and coverage identifier for the coverage scenarios as shown below. So when using one of the below coverage types, at least one of the corresponding identifiers should be used. So this now clarifies it. So if your coverage is for Medicare, the coverage type you'd specify from that value set is public poll, and you should provide a coverage identifier of the AU Medicare card number. And for DVA, use the coverage type of vet and use the DVA number. For concession, the coverage type is pay con, and it'd be the pensioner concession card number or the seniors healthcare card number or the healthcare card number. Private health insurance, the coverage type is HIP, and the insurance member number, and private self-funded is pay, and no identifier specified there. So what we'd also propose here is that we actually reference the AU-based coverage type guidance, because some of this is defined there. I'll show you that. If you look at the AU-based coverage profile, there is information here about when populating type. Medicare coverage should be represented in public poll, DVA is vet, private is pay. So it's got some guidance here on which ones we use. We're just going to summarize those for the ones that we think are relevant for eRequesting, but we'll still provide reference back to the AU base guidance on that as well. I think Andy was originally asking in this issue to put some invariance, so we would enforce this. So if you selected vet, it would force you to put an AU DVA number in there. But I think the positioning we're making now that we wouldn't use them at this stage to maintain some flexibility in release 1 for that. Does that cover it all, Andy?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I've got a question in the chat, do we? CTG status.
I'm just wondering why we've selected only this set. Compensation is a pretty big area, right? Workers' comp, travel, accidents, all sorts in that space. Large group of payers, if we were to look into our billing systems, are to deal with those sort of payers. We also, in non-territory, Defence Force is another big payer, which is a separate group again. And they have different requirements around what they want for identifiers and bits and pieces as well.
There is in the So this is just so what we did in, I'll jump back to eRequesting. So there is a coverage and self-pay codes value set, which is actually bound to this. So if we look at this here, this has all of these types in there, right? So it's got everything across the board, whole heap of stuff in here. What we've done is we've put a additional binding here saying minimum binding. So as a minimum, you should support these ones, right? So these are the ones we identified as our minimum, bare minimum you should support, which are the ones that we thought were the primary ones. But that doesn't mean you can't support any of the other ones. So that's where this is tied, that guidance to those minimum. But it is the binding. Well, the binding supports using the others as well. We haven't constrained it, so you can't use the others.
And how long ago or where did this set of coverage type codes come about?
The full set?
Yeah,
yeah.
We've
So
got, well, two things I noticed in the coverage type. You've got some that are really long and some that are really short. You've got a mixture between case, all uppercase, some all lowercase, and as a code system, it's pretty sort of crappy, right?
Yeah. So these are, so I don't know, Brett, are you on the call? Do you know the history of this? I thought he was there.
That values, isn't it? It's just the way they are.
Yeah, so the history of this is complicated. The original coverage codes are actually defined through the base fire specification. They're very US centric in terms of the codes. So as we've implemented eRequesting, we've created mappings for these. It's kind of something we've tried to push back to AU base, because those coverage types in the code system, we need to create an Australian version of that mapping. We want to, wherever possible, stay consistent with the codes themselves, but that doesn't mean to say we can't overlay our own descriptions on these things. So the codes are pretty ugly, but most people shouldn't be looking at codes. They should be looking at the display values for them. And that's something that we can potentially have some our own kind of version of. So as kind of Michael said, we have got a really minimum set. We actually in implementations have used a broader set. So we also use military. We've got we've got vehicle motor accident, and there's a few others that we kind of use as well. But as with a fair bit of the spec, we kind of are looking for some experience, and then the next kind of version of it, the next ballot we'll do, we'll actually seek out some more of those codes to actually formalize and put in the minimum set that you need to support. So as Mike said, it's not restricting you from using them, and there are usually appropriate codes to use. Some of the things like CTG stuff are going to need a lot more discussion in giving guidance to people, because it's maybe not going to be obvious how that maps into existing HL7 international codes, but certainly something I think that the group needs to bring on board. So some of that is probably good future work for us to look to.
Yeah, I mean, the only other comment I made is that, I guess a lot of what we've done here is, I guess, maybe not in the public hospital system, particularly requesting, whereas certainly all the jurisdictions around Australia have their own sort of interpretations on some of the rules around this. In fact, they have quite distinct legislation around what they must comply with and how they comply with, and the rules that they apply and all sorts of things. It's not so much a national thing, which even though they sort of are complying to some level of national requirement, more so when you get involved with claiming through Eclipse and the health funds and all that thing. But all those other things tend to have a bit more, jurisdiction specific sort of
Yep.
sort of tilt to them, depending on where they see their biggest sort of piece of the pie in some of those aspects, depending on what their some of the things that exist in their that might be quite unique to their jurisdiction. For example, here in the N2, I mentioned Defence Force and those sorts of things, and we have lots of tourism, and so you've got that sort of reciprocal agreements and all those sorts of other things that potentially are more important. So yeah, that it's not an easy thing, but I just sort of like I understand that the history and US codes, other bits and pieces, but these are the type of things that the whole billing system works quite differently in Australia compared to the US, and these are the things we need to somehow figure out how we make that more Australianized, and perhaps that which a lot of what's happened to date probably hasn't had a lot of focus on that. We had similar issues, with HL7 and all the rest of it. We've been through this journey before, but just there are a lot of commonalities in terms of things, and certainly some of the billing systems that have been implemented that are sort of the same system used around Australia to do these sort of things has ways of looking at this thing. So sometimes we need to sort of maybe extend out where we're really looking to get our information from some of these things, that not necessarily the sources that come from the US.
Yeah, I think on that too. So we actually, as the eRequesting TDG, we referred to Fire Work Group this issue here, which I've just put in the chat as well. So this is we're saying AU-based coverage profile requires coverage payer, and there's currently no guidance how the payer element should be populated. There's also no national list of payers, so we're noting on that, noting how this has changed in R5 and some other things, and this and how it's changed in R5. And we've sort of identified the need for clarification and how to populate coverage payer for the coverage type pay, constant pay. So this is very specific to this, but it's basically it's asking that AU base provides guidance or examples of how coverage pay is to be populated. So I think this ties into that to a degree as well, is that we've kind of, this is not something we can easily solve in eRequesting, and we shouldn't solve it in eRequesting. That we
should be only implementing what's agreed at a higher
but
level.
I think it is noted that it is a complex and a bit of a mess.
I know Brett's got his hand up, but I was just going to say that one of the ugly things about the as you said, uppercase, lowercase stuff, they're actually coming from two different code systems. So our value set is actually including across these two different code systems, and that's why we end up with this. So that's okay. That's
Does that mean we're needing to support case sensitivity in how these codes, because can they actually overlap and be different cases and all that sort of stuff?
We can make that decision in terms of the value set. But Brett, I know you're going to say something insightful.
Well, remains to be seen. I think we have the issue that Michael's pointed to in the backlog for AU-based work, but like we're in planning for what will happen for the next major version of AU-based, and what we really need is people to come and represent those issues and get them prioritised and have some leadership that can actually tell us what to do. Because the Firework Group doesn't have the knowledge to even solve this problem up front, right? We need to have input from those that need to use it and how it will be used. So there's going to be some stuff coming out about how we're going to do backlog prioritization and new item content, and this is a priority thing. We need to get a cohort together that can actually advise and make decisions and get an answer.
Okay.
That's all.
It's one of these things that we sort of in a way treading water, I guess what we're trying to say here, till we get a bit more what's happening in a more direct sense, or guided sense from those that maybe have a bit more skin in the game, and that's getting those people with that skin in the game involved is the trick, I guess.
Yep, that's exactly it, because we want people that know how it works for a start, and also have resources that can kind of contribute to how it should be, and make so we can make better decisions. Because there's plenty of generalists in the Firework Group, but we don't have the in-depth knowledge really of some of this area. So we kind of need people that have skin in the game that want to do it. Yeah, that's it.
So there, I mean, I guess there are certain things like that. So how do we go about that? You know, because this is probably spreading the net wider than people who are directly interested in fire per se, but they are probably interested in the types of concepts and values and other things that are going to be used. So they're not interested in fire per se, but they are interested in some of the, you know, what will actually transpire in transactions that we might be using fire as the transport mechanism, you know, if you get what I mean. So it's a sort of like a different, they're less interested in the technology, but more interested in what gets sent and received, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so I think we've got to take it back down to just what do we need to know,
Yeah.
and why do you need to exchange it? And I think we're back to kind of setting that out. Yeah, the code choices and the way they're structured. I mean, that's just the methodology, and I guess that's just the context that we can decide exactly what that is. But so I'm very keen. If like there's people that like really need it, it's going to need promoting in the firework group to be put on the roadmap, basically. So I think we're planning to do some sort of prioritization event in February next year. But of course, if you promote things earlier, that's helpful.
Okay.
I said we do have that other one for coverage on the backlog for the firework group. I think this is probably a bit broader than that, which is a bit about the value set. But yeah, I suppose, Brett, the part of that is using Zulip and the like when you're looking for feedback on things for the backlog for firework group and the like. So a bit broader.
We've got a lot of items on the firework group backlog that are either good ideas or need. But what we really need is people to come along and say, we have a bunch of people that are stakeholders. We kind of know what we need to do. Let's make some decisions and selections of what we're going to do. Because it's not like, I mean, issues that are thrown over the fence are not going to get handled because we don't have the people to answer the question. Yeah.
You know, I think there was just recently a conference, it's a health finance managers type conference that was held, but they're the people, if you know what I mean, that probably in that conference or in that, they're the people we need to, for these type of things. They're the people who are the stakeholders, if you like. So I don't know in terms of the broader concept around how we invite people to fire, where the focus is and how we get into those groups that are somewhat very topic specific and aren't interested necessarily in the broader pictures of other things, if you know what I mean. So we're getting down into, the rabbit hole of one particular thing. How do we get those people to get us straight on what we need when we're sort of looking at a much bigger bundle of things and they're only interested in a very small bundle of things? That's how we have to sort of try and, how do we isolate them and get them interested and to get us the detail on the topic without boring with things they're not interested in?
Wrap this discussion up, try and keep us on topic. It's a good discussion, but it's not quite the right forum. Michael, how are we going with this particular?
Yeah, I think, so are there any proposals to change? This, like we said, this isn't constraining the use of these. It's just providing some guidance to lead you down the path of how to use it in the way we would expect it to be used. Again, release one, this is the starting point. These are the things that we thought were most prominent to sort of call out, but it doesn't restrict you from using others. And it may become clearer that we do need to add more guidance in the future. But are we comfortable with this as the starting point? Is there any suggestions for any changes to this proposal? Well, if not, I'd like to motion that we accept this proposal as persuasive with modification. We're going to add must support the default obligations for coverage identifier. It's going to remain optional, 0 to many cardinality. We're going to add profile-specific implementation guidance to clarify how expected representation of coverage type and coverage for these coverage scenarios shown below. So again, this, like I said, it's probably only a subset, but it's some of the more common ones, to say what type to use and what identifier to use with it. Would reference the AU base coverage type guidance. So again, if more guidance ends up over time in AU base, we'll still reference it. And invariants won't be used to enforce this guidance. So it's just basically text to help you understand it, but there won't be any enforcement of this in release 1. So that was my motion. The words on the screen.
Thanks, Michael. Would anyone like to second that motion?
I'm happy to second it.
Thank you, Andy. Should be a poll up on your screen now.
+1 in the chat.
Thank you, and we are going to wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. Right, and that one is passed 17 affirmative, 16 + 1, and 2 abstained. Thank you.
Okay, next one is very much related. So I think we've probably talked this one to death, but I'll just put it in the chat. So this was about AU-based diagnostic request extension element. Insurance has a binding to eRequesting coverage, which needs localization. So I think we've just applied that localization. So these were separate tickets raised by different people. But it's basically that AU-based diagnostic request profile extension element. Insurance has a binding to coverage, but lists coverage types are international. Exactly the conversation we just had. And does not appear to be Australian specific. Guidance should be provided as to how to map common payers, e.g. Medicare, DVA, private, to this value set for an Australian specific value set defined and bound. So I think that is exactly what we have just done in that previous ticket. So these were done independently, but the proposal for this one was that the base coverage profile, AU base coverage profile, contains usage notes for coverage types use in an Australian context. The AU base coverage usage note should be referenced in the Australian AU eRequesting coverage profile. So again, we did say that in the previous ticket, but we're also saying it here, and that's where AU base says when you're using Medicare, you should use public poll. When you're public hospital, you should use AU pub hosp. DVA should be vet, etc. So that guidance is there. It is localized in AU base. So we just provide a reference to that. So we probably could reference the other ticket or the like, but I think probably just to create this one as distinct, it can be just persuasive, and we just add that reference. We're already going to do it in the other ticket, but that covers that off. Are we happy with that? Are we happy to accept that, given we just had all this discussion? So I'm happy to motion that this is persuasive, and we just add that reference, which we're already going to do anyway, but to cover it off in this ticket.
I'm happy to second, Charlie.
Okay, be a poll appearing on your screen momentarily.
One in the chat.
All right, and we're going to wrap that poll up in 3, 2, 1. And that is passed 16 affirmative, 1 in the chat, 15 in the poll, and 3 abstained. Thank you.
And last one. We've got a few minutes here. A few minutes. It's the last one. Okay, so this is guidance on representing body site and laterality in service request. So service requests, body site is flagged as must support in both eRequesting pathology request and imaging request, but the IG does not provide any guidance on how to represent body site and laterality. So there's a number of common scenarios there. Add guidance section to the general guidance page describing these scenarios and how to keep service request code and body site consistent. Then reference that guidance from the implementation guidance sections. So proposing this as being persuasive with modification. So we've already had a ballot ticket that went through AU base. So it was actually raised in AU core. We also asked from an eRequesting perspective to have the body site guidance updated in AU base to include service request. So that went through Firework Group and has actually been applied in AU base. So there's now updated guidance representing body site and laterality, including service request. So I might just show you that quickly. Oh. Where are we? So you'll see it here in guidance, general guidance. Oh. General guidance. Lots of guidance in here. Okay, here we go. So there's a section here on representing body site, which may include laterality. Put that in the chat. So this has just recently been updated. You'll see here now when exchanging procedure, condition, or service request. That service request has been included in this. It may need to represent relevant body site and associated laterality. So it goes through quite detailed of the different scenarios, how to assign it, how to use it, in quite a lot of detail. And so this would apply to all AU profiles, given this is defined in AU base. So our proposal here is provide a link to the AU base guidance on representing body site, which may include laterality, in the profile specific implementation guidance of the AU eRequesting imaging request profile. So in one of our other ballot issues, 52356, we've already removed must support an obligation for body site in pathology request. So no change is needed there. So this is just to provide the link in the only place that we're still using body site, which is in the imaging request profile, and provide a link back to that AU base guidance on how to use it. So hopefully that's clear enough. And I'd like to make a motion to make those changes, persuasive modification.
Seems pretty straightforward. Do we have a second for that one?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Andy. All right, poll incoming.
Last one in chat.
Thank you, and we shall wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. And that one is passed. 14 affirmative, 13 in the poll, 1 in chat, and 5 abstained. Thank you.
Right. So, we got through all of them. So that means we're on track to complete our ballot reconciliation on the next TDG meeting. So that's on the 4th of December. We will also be creating a snapshot of the eRequesting IG to take to the Connectathon on the 9th and 10th of December. It probably won't get items from the last meeting, but hopefully it'll get most of the normative changes that we've done to date, so that implementers can start testing them at the Connectathon. Then for the final meeting of the year, which would be the 18th of December, we will look to do a report back from the Connectathon, any findings, any issues we might have found with changes that we had. We also will do a fire maturity model review as well. So we've introduced some new profiles into eRequesting that are obligation profiles from AU Core, like we now have eRequesting patient, practitioner, organizational, the like. They are AFMM 0. In order to publish, we do need to get them to AFMM 1, which is basically that they don't have any errors and that the TDG accept them as implementable. So we'll look to do that in that meeting as well. But please vote on the e-vote that is out at the moment, because we need that to complete as well to finalize reconciliation. And I will also show you on our ballot reconciliation page. This one here. In chat. This is where you can track where we're up to. This status gets updated. Also has here on the upcoming votes. So you'll notice these are all the ones that we had scheduled for today that we've gone through. These are the ones that are remaining for next week. We may have a couple of others that have come up as we've been making changes, but these are the last of the identified ballot issues that will be in that meeting to go through. And then we've got all our completed ones here. So if you're looking for a summary of where we're up to, what we've done, this page is the place to go. But that was awesome. We got through everything and I didn't jinx us.
Very good.
Good effort.
Thanks, Michael. All right. Well, I think we'll probably wrap it up there then. Bang on time. 2 minutes to go.
Well done.
Well done,
Thank
team.
you.
Thanks.
See you next time.